In the past few weeks, we've listed 12 historical facts that are accepted by almost all critical scholars today concerning Jesus' life. And the fifth fact in this list is a surprising one. It's this: the disciples had experiences which they believed were appearances of the risen Jesus to them. Now, I asked historian Dr. Gary Habermas, what is the evidence for this fact? Listen.
Well, given the belief that Jesus was crucified, which virtually everybody's tuning into and admitting, I think the most crucial fact is that there were certain eyewitnesses, there were certain disciples, men and women, who deeply believed that they saw appearances of the risen Jesus, or to say it a little different way, they had an experience which they thought was an appearance of the risen Jesus. And we know that because they proclaimed it. I think that's the single most important testimony to the belief in the resurrection appearances.
Now, Dr. Ben Witherington has written many well-received scholarly books on the historical Jesus, and he's professor of New Testament at Asbury Theological Seminary. I asked him why historians think Jesus must have appeared to his disciples.
They believed it, but how do you know they were actually seeing something?
Well, in terms of the psychological profile of the disciples, if we believe that it is true that they denied, deserted, and betrayed Jesus, that they had given him up for lost when he died on the cross, psychologically, something significant had to have happened to change all of their minds about this particular issue after the crucifixion of Jesus. Because remember, no early Jews were looking for a crucified Messiah. That would be, if you wanted to scotch the rumor that Jesus was Messiah, get him crucified, that would prove that he was cursed, not blessed by God, not the anointed one of God. So here they are, completely shattered. Their world has been turned upside down. They've spent the last year, 2 years, 3 years of their life apparently for nothing following Jesus. What was going to change that opinion? Something from outside of themselves had to impact them like a sledgehammer hitting them over the head to change their mind about the fact that Jesus was dead and gone. Something dramatic had to have happened. Martin Debelius, a German scholar, once said, you need to posit an X big enough between the death of Jesus and the birth of the early church to explain the connection. If you don't posit an X big enough, then you haven't explained the historical connection.
Now, next we want to ask, is there any testimony from secular, non-Christian writers indicating that they knew Jesus' disciples believed he had appeared to them? The answer is yes, and Dr. Gary Habermas explains.
We've got a source like Phlegon that tells us that besides the darkness that surrounded the earth at the cross, he says Jesus appeared later and he showed the disciples his wounds, his body. And again, we're not told if they touched him, but he showed himself to the disciples after his resurrection. Josephus, in a highly disputed passage, says that Jesus showed himself after 3 days. Now, what a lot of scholars think about this passage is that the original reading is the disciples taught that he appeared to them 3 days later, which if that's the reading, and it's what a lot of scholars will admit, it's exactly the point we're making right here. You've got some Gnostic sources that admit the resurrection. I'm thinking the Gospel of Truth, one of the earliest ones. You've got the Treatise on Resurrection that does this. And even the Gospel of Thomas, the much debated Gospel of Thomas, somebody will say, well, yeah, but there's no death and resurrection in Thomas. But the opening line in the Gospel of Thomas, the risen one is doing the speaking. And so the living one is doing the speaking. And so it's often said that the whole perspective of Thomas is from the resurrected Jesus. You have two historians, Tacitus and Suetonius, both well-respected Roman historians who don't teach a resurrection, but they say, funny thing, after this guy died, this mischievous superstition broke out anew. And so you have to say, what's the basis for this mischievous teaching, being spread around the Mediterranean? So you've got a couple hints there from two historians, a couple direct comments from Phlegon and probably Josephus. You've got some Gnostic Gospels. That's a fair amount from outside the New Testament itself.